Hey, welcome to the Feast Life, where we empower you, the modern homeschool mom, to create a life and homeschool you love. I'm Julie Ross, the creator of the award-winning curriculum A Gentle Feast, a homeschool veteran of over 20 years, and a certified Christian life coach. Charlotte Mason said, life should be all living, not a mere tedious passing of time. So on this show, we seek to savor the feast of life. So go get your favorite beverage and pull up a chair. You're welcome at this table. Hey everyone, it's Julie Ross from the Feast Life podcast. Today I am sharing with you an episode I actually did on someone else's podcast where they interviewed me. I was on the Educational Breakdown podcast and I had a lovely chat with Sarah all about Charlotte Mason. And I wanted to share that here too because so many people ask me questions, so many people are interested in this approach to home education, but there's just a lot. So in this episode, I break it down to what's really essential, what's really important to know, and take a listen.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today on the Education Breakdown. A few weeks ago, back in episode 39, we were chatting with some folks from a school called the Trinity School, which was a private school that was primarily focused on classical education. But in that conversation, we briefly touched on the work of a woman named Charlotte Mason. And we didn't get to learn very much about her. So today, our guest, Julie Ross, is here to dive deep with us to help us understand more about Charlotte Mason and her approach to education and the work that Julie does with families to support them on their journey of incorporating Charlotte Mason into their homes and their lives. So, Julie, thank you so much for being here. And can you just start us off by introducing yourself to our listeners? And I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about your family and what you do.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, this is one of my favorite things to talk about. So I'm excited to get to share this with your people. And that's great that they're kind of learning about some different approaches to education. And, it's an obscure kind of name that people might not know, but it's definitely becoming more and more popular in the homeschool community here in the United States. So I'm excited to talk to you about her. But to start, I'll tell you a little bit about me. So my background is in education. I was a public school teacher. Then I helped start a private Christian school. Then I started a homeschool hybrid school. So I've been in all the different kind of gamuts. And then I've been homeschooling my own kids for over 20 years now. I have two adult children, which sounds crazy to say. My oldest graduated from the University of South Carolina 2 years ago with a focus in graphic design. And then my second daughter is studying neuroscience and she'll graduate in May. So that's exciting. And then I have three teenagers, 16, 15, and 14, that I'm still homeschooling. So life is very busy on top of homeschooling, which all homeschool parents know is definitely a full-time job. I also run my own homeschool publishing company that I've run for the past almost 10 years now, called A Gentle Feast. I'm also a certified Christian life coach and I coach homeschool moms as well. So in my free time, I nap and read books about education. So there you go.
I love that. Wow, you're just a wealth of knowledge already, I can tell, both from this parenting perspective
Yeah.
and then as well from the education perspective. So I'm really excited to talk to you today.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that you were a public school teacher long, long ago. So can you kind of
Mhm.
like walk us through what that journey has been like for you with in the field of education, kind of,
Mhm.
where you started and then how did you get to where you are now?
Yeah, it's funny. I was talking to someone about this the other day. I went in to education. I mean, I've known I wanted to be a teacher since I was a little girl. Like I never changed my mind of what I wanted to do with my life. And I was kind of idealistic and very like Anne of Green Gables-esque, and I'm going to change the world and all these things. And once I started teaching, I quickly realized it wasn't possible in the constraints of testing and the requirements and all the things I had to do and just some of the struggles. I taught in a Title I school and I just became very quickly disenfranchised with the system. And this is a very interesting story. So our church at the time had a library, and one day I was walking by and there was this book sitting on the display. It's called For the Children's Sake by Susan Schaefer Macaulay. And I was like, oh, I'm a teacher. This sounds interesting. It's a book about education. That's what I do in my free time. So I got this book and I literally stayed up till like 3 in the morning and I was just sobbing. And I was like, yes, this is it. This is what I want for children. This is how I believe education should be. Susan Schaefer Macaulay, her children went to a Charlotte Mason school in England in the 70s. And so she wrote this book, and it just was such a beautiful picture of what learning can be like. And I realized there was no way for me to give that to my students in my class. And so then, I tried the private Christian school realm, still needed that salary. And then I
Mm-hmm.
was like, this isn't working. And then when I had my own kids, realized I wanted to homeschool and something I knew nothing about. And at the time, there was very few resources available.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of it was learning by trial and error and all of that because this is an excellent, excellent book. And there are some really practical suggestions in here, but it's not like, here's what you do with your kids on Monday. Here's how you teach this to this age. Like, it's more of just the kind of Charlotte Mason overview of philosophy and, how to incorporate that into all different kinds of learning, not just homeschooling. So how do I actually teach this beautiful philosophy and approach on a daily basis to my kids? That's what I kind of had to figure out on my own.
Yeah, absolutely. So, can you tell me, I'm curious to get like a little peek into your
Yeah.
public school classroom. Like what was that like and what were the challenges that you were facing that you were like, this is not how I envisioned my teaching going?
Yeah, so I taught fifth grade and I brought all my like Little House on the Prairie books and all of the just literature that I love, and I set up these cozy little reading nooks, and we're gonna like talk about big ideas and we're gonna read stories together. And my class, I would say I had about 25 kids in my class. About 10 of them were reading on a first grade reading level. And so these weren't even in the realm of possibilities of books they could enjoy. And then it was very much, here's the test they have to take at the end of fifth grade. Here's all the information they need to know for this test. Here's the science standards. Here's the history standards. You have to read these textbooks at the district box for lots of money that have excerpts of books. We don't have time to read books. You're just teaching them the skills of reading, not actually to love and enjoy reading with real books. We don't have time for that. So like, here's the
Mm.
little pages they read, here's the questions they answer, because this is the skill they need to be able to take a test while not actually thinking about reading or knowledge or anything like that. So that was kind of the big things. And then just
Yeah.
really, sadly, my kids had so much trauma in their lives and so many things that they barely could function in school or concentrate, or their curiosity and love for learning had sadly died by the time they were in fifth grade. And despite my best efforts to try to get that back, it was like
Hmm.
this system's very broken.
Yeah, yeah. So that either love of learning or being able to like go deep into things so that you could enjoy things. Like it sounds like you weren't really able to do that because it was like here
Yeah.
are the standards and we got to keep moving and this is just the skill they need and it's not about fostering any love of anything. It's
Mhm.
like check the box and then like
Right.
move on. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so you first learned about Charlotte Mason totally randomly from this book that you
Right.
picked up. Oh,
Yep.
okay, that
Never
is
had heard
like
of her in my life.
right. I mean, that's just incredible. You're like, who put that book there for me? You
Right.
know? Um, so tell us a little bit more about how, you were interested in her from the get-go from this book. Like it
Mhm.
sparked something in you of like, this is what could be possible. Um, how did you get into homeschooling and decide that the Charlotte Mason approach was kind of how you were gonna go forward with
Yeah.
that?
Yeah. So I had known in the back of my mind that I wanted to homeschool for a while. But then when my oldest daughter was born, I was in a Bible study at her church, and they had a homeschool co-op that was meeting at the church the same time as this Bible study. And so I would go to my little class and I would drop her off in the nursery. And then about 20 minutes later, they would come and get me because she had colic and she was just screaming.
Oh.
And so, like, every week, I never actually really got to stay in the Bible study, and I would go to the nursery. Well, the nursery workers were these homeschool teenage girls who were doing that as part of their class credits and stuff, while this
Okay.
co-op was meeting. And so I was just sitting there the whole rest of the time and just talk to them. And I was like, These girls are so smart, so articulate, so caring,
Mm,
so mature for their age.
mm,
And I was like, this is what I want my daughter that I'm holding to
mm.
grow up to be.
Oh.
And just, getting to meet them and their families, like I had never had any experience with it before. And yeah, so it was always like there. And then when I first started homeschooling my kids, I laugh now because they were both, lower elementary, and then I had three kids under the age of three.
Oh,
And
Julie.
I'm like, oh, let's start homeschooling. This sounds like a great plan. And so I went with what I knew, which was school. Like
Okay. Yep.
you have a workbook for every subject.
Yeah.
You have a textbook. I even had a flag and we said the pledge and we had recess time. And I was like, okay, this is cool. This is so great.
I know how to do school.
Yeah, I've done this. I went to school for this. I am an expert. Let me show you. And yeah, like 2 years in, I was about ready to lose my mind
Mm,
because that doesn't necessarily work when you have a lot of kids and you're home. And again, it wasn't cultivating that atmosphere that I knew I wanted from this book, but then I'm
mm,
like, I don't know what else to do. And so
mhm,
I was like, either I'm going to quit homeschooling and throw in the towel because I'm just so completely exhausted and burnt out. And again, there wasn't a ton of resources or support. And
mm.
so but I remembered that book and I went and reread it. And I was like, okay, I have to figure out this kind of Charlotte Mason philosophy and how to actually put this in my home. So she wrote 6 volumes of educational philosophy.
Okay. There
So,
they are.
light reading. And I was like, okay, I'm just gonna dive in. I'm gonna figure this out. Back then we had Yahoo groups to
Yes. Okay.
message other parents on, and there really wasn't anything else on the internet. So it was really her work and then just messaging back and forth with some parents. And I'm like, okay, I know she talks a lot about reading really good books. And I've always loved literature. I had this whole huge collection of books from, my whole life.
Hmm.
And so let's just start reading these and talking about these. And it really was this kind of night and day difference of all of that pressure that I had felt as a teacher, but then also putting on my own kids just slowly started to go away. And I was able to just enjoy being with
Mm.
them and being outside in nature and reading these lovely books and having discussions and going on field trips and like doing all these things. But I felt like I was still had to like kind of, I feel like I had to deschool myself. I don't know if you've heard that term, like
Yes.
unschool myself from this kind of mindset of this is the only way children can learn. And this is the only way you're going to be successful in teaching your own children and get out of that kind of traditional school mindset and kind of try some of this for myself and see like, oh wait, this does actually work. This is actually better. This is an amazing way to learn and experience life. But it takes somewhat of a de-schooling of yourself, but that also just a lot of faith of going, this isn't normal. Like, especially like if you have a traditional school background or like that's the only experience you're like, this is different.
Yes.
And I don't like I liked kind of, I'm gonna be honest, I liked having the little worksheet that I checked at the end of the day and they got 9 out of 10 right. And I'm like, yes, I'm killing this homeschool thing,
Hmm.
and so without having those like workbooks and tests and all of that, it can be a little like, ooh, I don't know. And it's part of trusting that kind of process and knowing like, okay, this has been around for, Charlotte Mason lived in the late 1800s. It's been around for a very long time. It's not some newfangled idea that
Hmm.
I can't trust the results. And, she started out teaching governesses to go into people's homes. So she started a school in Ambleside, England, to train governesses to go into people's homes, which I laugh about because I was like, can we get those back? Because that would be really nice. And, as her ideas gained in popularity throughout the British Empire, there were lots of homeschool, I mean, not homeschool at the time, they weren't called that, a
Hmm.
lot of moms who were like, wow, this looks really great, but I can't afford a governess. Can you
Okay.
send me your programs of what you're doing? And so they started doing it in their homes. She believed that home was the best place for children to learn. So out of all the educational theories, philosophers of all time, I have yet to meet another one who was an advocate for homeschooling. So her
Mm-hmm.
philosophy is built on the premise that children learn best at home.
Okay. All right. I'm glad that you pointed that out because I that was something that I wasn't sure about. If it was
Yeah.
something that, you know, was sometimes found in schools, but I definitely see it so much more in the homeschooling community. So that
Yeah,
makes
and
sense.
there
Like
and there
that's
are
where,
schools like I said, Susan Schaefer Macaulay, that book I read. Her kids were in a Charlotte Mason school. There's several here in the United States as well. Um, they're still in England today.
Mm.
So I mean, but it's what oftentimes happens in the homeschool space is they take an approach that's been used in school and they adapt it for home, where hers was originally for home and adapted for school.
Okay.
So it's
Okay.
different. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so we got a little bit of history about Charlotte Mason,
Yeah.
like the time she was from, kind of her original, like training these governesses. I mean, do you have any sense of like what problem she was trying to solve? What was her kind of impetus for this?
Yeah. So she was a public school teacher in England. She actually was orphaned. And so at 16, she went to school to become a teacher
Okay.
and support herself, which is just an incredible, like, go Charlotte story too. So I
Yes.
love that about her as well. But so, back then it was very, sadly not a ton different than a lot of schools today, but very much focused on rote drill and memorization because you had a wide range of students in a class, very large classes at the time, and you were just kind of trying to get as much information into their heads as possible and keep order at the time. And so, Charlotte Mason was an extremely brilliant woman, extremely well read, had traveled through Europe, and just saw that like this isn't how kids learn. Like this isn't normal. This isn't right. And so she started giving lectures on her kind of views of education to raise money for her church. And they took those lectures and they put them into her first volume, which is Home Education.
Okay.
And she never had children of her own, but was, experiencing this approach used with hundreds of others of children. And so her approach is very much like a hands-on, not an esoteric sitting in an office somewhere speculating
Mm-hmm.
about education, but actually like real approach with real children, getting feedback from these governesses, getting feedback from the children that they were working with in Ambleside, and like developing from what children actually are learning. Her problem that she was trying to solve was one that this kind of industrialized method of education is ineffective. But then
Okay.
also she really had a passion for children who were poor. And back in Victorian England, the kind of mindset was if you were born into a certain class, you could be educated. And if you weren't, you were just genetically not able to learn.
Okay.
Where in reality, these children were working in factories and, things like that. They didn't even have the opportunity to go to school to learn,
Mm-hmm.
and she was like, her first principle is children are born persons. And she's like, no, all children are capable of learning if they are given the right opportunities. And so really making this kind of style of education accessible for all children, which I think is very beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's really cool because it sounds like she was really revolutionary. I'm
Oh, 100%.
imagining. Yeah,
Yes. And
I
she
mean,
used that
like,
word too. Like this is a
okay.
revolution. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, for her to, especially at that time in history, to go against the grain
As a
and
woman too. Yeah.
as a
Like
woman,
it's
right, to depart
amazing.
from the norm and
Yeah.
say, hold on, the way that everyone thinks is right, I don't think is right. I mean,
Mhm.
how like brave and amazing of her to
Yeah.
be able to do that at that
And it
time.
shows how smart she is too in her writings because she criticizes and breaks down the popular educational theories of her day. So like people that most of us don't know who they are unless you're really super education nerd because they were
Yeah.
like education philosophers in like Germany and other parts of Europe. A lot of people know Maria Montessori. They were
Hmm.
contemporaries, so she did kind of criticize her and some of the her later volumes, some of the teachings that were starting to come out in America on educational philosophy at that time. But like, she would say like, okay, this person thinks this. This is why I disagree with them, and kind of break down her thinking. And so, she really was incredibly well versed. And then she also based it a lot on how have children learned throughout time? Like,
Mm,
how do we see them learning this like box style, all these kids in this one room memorizing all this stuff? This isn't how children learn for hundreds of years. How did they learn?
mhm.
Well, they were filled with ideas and then they talked about them. And why aren't we using this as a tool for education?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's very simple in its approach. And I think oftentimes parents can be like, I don't really understand. There's just a lot, and if you go online and like Google it, it's like, what is this? And then there's lots of misconceptions too. And people who say, like, this is Charlotte Mason, RLC homeschool curriculum, like, this is Charlotte Mason inspired, but
Mm.
it has a lot of things that I know she talks vehemently against. So it's
Okay.
like, it can be sort of confusing, but when you boil it down to like, okay, here are the basic
Hmm.
tenets. It's living books.
Okay.
We can talk about what those means, and narration, which is talking about what you're learning, which he's saying is what humans are meant to. We're people of story. We're people who
Hmm.
like to express and share. When you learn something and you're excited about it, you go tell somebody about it, right? You don't need to fill out a workbook page to prove that you
Hmm.
learned it, right? And in fact,
Right.
that's not actually proving that you're learning it because it shows, a very rote, lower level critical thinking. But when you have to tell somebody back in your own words, put it in logical sequencing, decide what's important, what's not important. There are so many higher level thinking skills that are part of that. Um, and that can either be like younger kids, even older kids, actually. She never stopped doing this, telling you orally about it
Okay.
or writing about it as they got older. So
Mm.
again, it's a very natural way. It eliminates a ton of busy work. So you're able to have more time in your day to, you know, go be outside and let your child explore different interests or whatever, because you're not doing school for 8 hours a day, or having to get through all these workbooks because
Hmm.
it's, you're not making a salt dough clay map of China. Like you're just reading a book about China and talking about it. It takes a lot less time.
Okay. Okay, so tell us more then about those living books. What
Yes.
is that? Let's just start at the basic. What did Charlotte Mason mean by that? A living book.
Yeah. So think opposite of textbooks. So textbooks are usually written by a committee of people, and they're usually drizzled down to like, what are the bare facts? What is the basic information that we need to know about
Hmm.
XYZ topic? Um, a living book is one that's usually written by one person who's really passionate about their subject. So written by a historian, written by a chemist, like whatever the subject
Okay.
matter is. And they're told in a living way, meaning that they're like narrative in fashion. They capture your interest, they capture your imagination. She said, our minds can only feed on one type of food, just like our bodies need healthy food and nutrients to grow. Our minds can only be fed upon ideas. She said information was like sawdust. We're stuffing kids' minds with it, but it's clogging up the system. And
Mm.
what they actually need to grow are ideas, and ideas can be found in books that make you think and grow those ideas. It can also be found in nature, art, music, and poetry, and a million other things she includes in her programs. But um, living books is one piece of that. But again, those ideas she incorporates in the other things I mentioned as well.
Okay. All right. I'm thinking about what you just said. Information is like sawdust. And I'm thinking about how that is that a quote from Charlotte Mason?
Uh-huh. Yeah,
Okay.
I could find that one if you want, but she
Oh
also
no. No, I'm
explained,
just thinking
yeah,
about the time period in which she said that and how much information was
oh yeah,
available
I know, right?
then.
Right.
And then think about now,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And this idea of like clogging the mind. How
Yeah.
interesting.
She said
Yeah.
it can make the child look like they're stuffed up like a scarecrow, right?
Mhm.
Like it fills them up, right? It can
Yeah.
puff you
Like,
up
oh,
with
I
knowledge.
I
Yeah,
can
I can
say
quote
these little
this, but
facts and
yep.
figures or whatever.
Right, but I have no context of what that actually meant or who that leader was or why was it important that that battle happened in 1066? Like,
Mm,
how did that forever change Europe that,
mm.
the French came over and conquered England? Like, I have no clue, but I could tell you when the battle was
Yeah,
because I
yeah,
memorized it
yeah.
in
Uh-huh.
fifth grade.
Oh, wow. Okay. That's a really cool idea. Um, so I oftentimes think of living books as like classic books. Is
Mhm.
that true? Do they have to be classic books?
No, there's a ton of really beautiful actual books that have been written in the past 20 years. Now, are there really not so great books that have been written in the past 20? Absolutely, right? The publishing industry from her time
Yes.
to today is night and day different. But
Yep.
even in her time, there were books that were like these sweet little sappy Victorian moralistic little children's books, like
Okay.
those
Okay.
existed then too. Like she called it twaddle. And
Yes.
it's like sweets, like feeding your kids with sweets isn't healthy, right? Feeding their mind with
Mhm.
these sweets, they're going to be drawn to that. And, I laugh now because it's like if she only saw what kids are like, we don't want to feed their minds with these sweet little moral tales, but now it's like
Like, look
they're
at
feeding
the
a steady diet of sweets of, technology and all the, et cetera, the distractions of
right.
our day that's now competing against And I tell parents this, when they're kind of bringing their kids, if they're new to this approach, if they've been used to kind of textbooks where all the information has been digested for them and just
Hmm.
kind of delivered. Charlotte Mason uses this metaphor of like a mama bird, how they digest the food and then they kind of vomit it into the kid's
Okay.
mouth. It's gross, right? But like that's what textbooks really do. They take all the information and
Digest
then
it for
they
you.
just digest it for you and tell you what's
Okay.
important, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Rather than letting you do the hard mental work of
Mhm.
reading these ideas and chewing it and discovering it for yourself. So yes, I feel like there are some wonderful classics out there to include. I feel like it's really important there to have like a mix. I love picture books. They're gorgeous. Shirley Mason didn't have those in her time,
Okay.
especially for the younger kids. But allowing them to kind of stretch into it because at first it could be like, again,
Mm.
I'm used to candy and now you want me to eat broccoli? Like what?
Okay. Right.
But then you start to develop a taste and you're like, oh, I actually feel better when I eat broccoli and not candy all day. And like,
Hmm.
then you want that. And I recently read an article, it was in the Atlantic, from a professor from Columbia University. And and there were some, statistics in there and whatnot about how little kids actually read real books in school now. Did you see that
I
article?
have seen that. Yes.
Yes, it
Hmm.
was
Been
fascinating.
in
And
college.
I knew that was true from my experience 20 years ago. And then also my daughter's, I remember my daughter in college, she was taking like English 201 or something. Actually, she had taken 101 as a high school student for dual
Hmm.
enrollment. And then she could, and I was like, oh, can I see what you're reading for English? And it was like this textbook, and it had Google articles, excerpts of, different things. And she's like, Mom, you made us read like Les Mis and the Count of Monte Cristo, and you're like, you're gonna need this, in college. And she's like, we don't read any of that. She's like, all the stuff we read in high school is way harder than this stuff. It's like, oh, sorry.
I mean, that's what that article was talking about.
Yeah.
Is like even in college, the professors aren't assigning full novels
Hmm.
because apparently the kids can't
Can't
read
read them.
them.
No. They're used to these bites. I mean, think about it, like TikTok. If things are 3 seconds long, right? Like you're used to these little bite-sized bits of information again.
Mhm.
And so to have to think critically, they don't have the stamina to
Right.
read an
Hmm.
actual full book. And then, adults, I forget what the number is of adults that have read one book in the past year. I mean, it's unbelievable.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, Charlotte Mason. Like, I'm so sorry.
I know,
When
right?
she's looking down, you're like, oh gosh. Oh, okay. So I have another question I want to ask
Yeah.
you about. So Charlotte Mason, a lot of times I see her work weaved in with Christianity in
Okay.
particular. So
Hmm.
I'm curious, was Charlotte Mason, is her philosophy inherently like from a Christian perspective, or is that
Yes.
something that has kind of more organically drawn Christian families to
Yeah,
her?
that's a great question. So Charlotte was a very devout Christian.
Okay.
She actually wrote 6 volumes of poetry where she translated the Gospels into poems. So she had a tremendous personal faith life. And like I said, the first volume is based on lectures she was giving to raise money for her church.
Right.
Um, and so she believed that all ideas are divinely inspired. So all knowledge that we're giving our children is divinely inspired. Um, so even, Aristotle, Shakespeare, it doesn't have to necessarily come from a Christian author to
Mm,
be full of divine wisdom and ideas. And so, you can read a book by a scientist who they might not be a Christian, but they love chemistry and they're passionate about the subject. And chemistry is designed and created by God. And so
okay.
it's a Christian worldview without having to be all packaged up and cleaned up, if that makes sense. And
Yeah.
so
Hmm.
I like that approach a lot from her. She said there's 3 spheres of learning: knowledge of God, knowledge of universe. Wait, what's the other one? Knowledge of man. Sorry.
Okay.
Knowledge of God, knowledge of universe, and knowledge of man. So those were her. I mean, so it's a huge part of what she's saying. Kids need to be learning about, talking about, but not in a way that's um, cleaned up, moralistic. She was very against like the parents lecturing and giving like little points about the stories, but letting those kind of sink in. And as children are reading those and they're looking at different people's lives and why did Alexander the Great do XYZ, and they're talking about it, right? They can start to kind of form that worldview of, okay, well, that was not a really great choice. And this
Okay.
person did this, and this is the consequences, and this is how it shaped the world based on what they were doing. And so, I'm often asked, like, are all your books used in your curriculum by Christian authors? I'm like, well, no, because these are people who are historians, and they're books
Mm,
about, Harriet Tubman or whatever, but I think they're beautiful books, but all of these ideas are from God because she said there's not that separation of sacred and secular, that all ideas are from the divine. So
okay. Okay, that makes
that
sense. So it's
helps.
all just kind of like woven in, and it's kind of more the worldview from which things are looked at or digested within the curriculum, if you will.
Right, right. But it's
Okay.
not we've packaged it all neatly together and censored this and that. And so, I think it can be accessible to anyone really of different faiths and whatever, because it's not a pushing it, if that makes
Okay.
sense.
Hmm.
But being very well read and being able to think critically and being able to have discussions and listen to different viewpoints is all wrapped in there. And so I really, I know several families who use my curriculum who are not Christians, and um, you other faiths and whatever too. So
Okay.
they're able, you're able to, you might not sing hymns, right? If that's something
Hmm.
that is not particularly interesting to your family, but she also had them singing folk songs. And so, it's very adaptable, I think, for a lot of people.
Okay. Okay. And I think I know the answer to this question, but I want to make sure I've got it clear for our listeners. Is there an actual curriculum that Charlotte Mason created, or is it more just like a philosophy that is like in her works?
That is such a great question. So she established, like I said, that training college for governesses, and then she
Hmm.
established the Parents National Education Union, which she had a magazine that she edited, and she would give have lectures. But I love the fact that she was always bringing in the most research, always bringing in critical thinkers and people who were like doing new innovative things in their fields for science or um, philosophy or whatever it was. She would bring these people in to write for her magazine or to give these lectures. So it was always, she was always learning, and you feel that in what her approach was. But like I said, as parents and schools wanted to, like, okay, this is great, Charlotte, but like, what do we actually do here with these
Yeah,
kids?
yeah.
She started writing programs, and you can actually find these online for free. Like Internet Archive has these old programs you can look
Okay.
at, and it's basically like a book list. So it would say like this age should read this for geography, and this age should read this for nature study. And she would send that out for the year. And then she would also send out exam questions at the end of the term. So her programs, and I think still England Today has 3 terms instead of we have 4 quarters here
Okay.
in our schools. So same kind of breaking up the school year. But at the end of the term, she would send out exams, and then parents, and they're very different than what we're thinking of as
Okay.
exams. They're more like, tell me about the French Revolution. And the kids would, yeah.
The
So
narration piece.
yes, it's very much narration. But they would actually send those back, and she would actually read and write comments on all of them.
Oh my word.
I know. Isn't that amazing?
Her herself?
Yes, her herself.
Wow.
So
Okay.
it wasn't like you wrote to Charlotte Mason and you got a big box with all the books she
Right.
recommended, and here's what you do on week one, on day one. It was more of a book list. Here's the pages you should read over the course of the year. And then, they did have places where she would recommend to write to go buy these resources because,
Okay.
especially people that lived internationally and whatnot had to try to get them. But it wasn't like she wrote out something that, you could just, what we typical think of as homeschool curriculum of
Yes.
do this lesson on this day with this thing, here you go. Like it was
Yep.
very much more of a book lesson and approach. um and but it was always changing and adapting, which I love about her too. Like it wasn't like she wrote this and this is the only thing you follow forever and ever. Like as new research or new books came out, she was always innovating and changing what the
Okay.
programs included. So you could see kind of the evolution of them from, when she first started printing them to even after her death. I mean, some of those programs go up in the 60s and 70s. You can still find them online, that the Parents National Education Union kept printing after her death. So,
Okay.
um, No, that's a great question. I think it's important for people to realize. So there's lots of like a Gentle Feast and a million other ones out there. People who have taken this kind of philosophy I mean, I looked at her book lists on
Hmm.
archive.org and a lot of those books are in the public domain. So you could find the book that she recommends
Okay.
and read through. Okay, why did she recommend this? Okay, is this still something I'd want to use today? Because
Hmm.
or is this, especially science, like really outdated? Or, are there newer, better books that have been published that
Right.
are more engaging, have different pictures, have different things. And so
Right.
looking at, okay, this is what she says to use for this subject, like third grade geography or whatever. Can I find something comparable? It's easier for people to find too. Like some of these books are going for a couple $100 on eBay because all the Charlotte
Oh,
Mason people are fighting over these
wow.
wonderful, beautiful books that she included, right? It's like, okay, this isn't realistic for every family. So that's lovely, but like what else could we use?
Right. We also have some other great options that are gonna like
Right.
hit on the same thing.
Yeah. We need to, pay the grocery bill this week. So that book's probably not gonna happen.
All right, so I feel like I have this picture in my mind of like the time with Charlotte Mason in my homeschool with
Mhm.
like beautiful books and like meaningful conversations, perhaps a lot of writing if my kids were older and they were narrating in
Mhm.
that sort of way. What about like is there, when you think about science or things that are typically more of a like hands-on kind of
Mhm.
thing,
Mhm.
like what does that look like in a
Mhm.
Charlotte Mason like
Yep.
homeschool world?
Yep. That's a great question. So for the younger kids, they started out with nature study. This actually applies to her approach to every subject. You start with what the kids know and can experience at a young age, because that's how it's so developmentally appropriate, her approach, which I love. And it's like, how does she know this stuff back then? Because now like research is now supporting what she's saying. But
Mm-hmm.
young kids, they need to experience it, they need to see it, they need to have their senses engaged, kind of thing. They can't think. Abstract reasoning doesn't develop to around age 10. So if you're going to
Right.
learn like the periodic table at 5, like that doesn't mean
Doesn't,
anything to you,
yeah. Yeah.
right? But I can put the baking soda and the vinegar together at 5 and go, oh, something happened.
Mm-hmm.
Or I can be out in nature and I could be observing these mushrooms and, they weren't this color last week and now they're this color, or they weren't there 2 weeks ago, but now they're here. I
Mm-hmm.
wonder why. Like, and getting them curious and getting them out, and also they're exploring and playing. So science at that age was nature study. And it's really interesting because that was a subject that was actually very valued in the early 1900s, even here in
Okay.
America. Or if you've read like Anne of Green Gables, like they're out there in nature every
Mm-hmm.
day doing this kind of natural science, but we have let that go
Mm.
in our schools today. And it's like, what's the information we can learn for science at this age? And let's color a picture of it. And it's like, no, I want to experience it. So these young
Mm.
kids experience it, but then as they get older, they develop into like more of the traditional streams of science that you would know, biology, chemistry, physical science, those kind of things. And she had them doing experiments. So it wasn't only books, it's
Okay.
books and things. So
Okay.
these things are the experiments, the trial and error kind of approach that she took to it, which I also love because I think we can get in our head that like if it didn't work out the way the experiment said, we have failed. And it was like, well, no, that's actually what science is. It's going, okay, well, why didn't that work? And asking the
Mm.
big questions and trying it and allowing yourself to be curious and wonder again.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, even in high school, they're doing, the harder level sciences. But they're reading, so like for instance, for like chemistry, the book I use is called Napoleon's Buttons, and it breaks down Napoleon's uniform and all the different chemical compounds. But it's still like chemical reactions and math and things like in the book too.
Okay.
And they're doing experiments with chemical equipment and stuff. So it's not like, and I think that is a myth I often hear about Charlie Mason is like, oh well, she doesn't include any STEM stuff. It's like, well, no, she actually did, but it was in a balanced approach. It wasn't like do this to the detriment of all other subjects.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, one of the studies I quote a lot, it was done by Google. It was called Project Oxygen.
Okay.
And they studied the skills that their top employees had. And there were like 8 different things.
Okay.
And out of those 8 skills, the one that came in dead last was STEM skills.
Okay.
All the other skills were critical thinking, being able to express your ideas, having empathy, being able to work well with others, like all the
Mm,
things that I feel like a humanities-based Charlotte Mason kind of education gives a child. So,
mm.
but oftentimes we can focus so much on, okay, what are the skills? What are the things they need? This technology,
Right,
they
this
need this
hard
stuff for
skill.
life.
Yep.
And really, the things that she exposes the child to these beautiful, rich ideas, being able to communicate and express yourself. It don't matter if you're like a farmer or an astronaut, like you need that in life.
Yes.
And that's what that study was showing, these top employees. And now, employers are starting to realize that, like, yes, skills are really important, but I could teach you that on the job in a month. But it's a lot harder to teach somebody empathy and critical thinking.
Yes. Yeah, we talk about that a lot on this podcast about, it gets this kind of buzz term, I guess, the 21st century skills, all those
Mhm.
things you're talking about,
Yeah.
that creativity and critical thinking, and how it seems like so many people, employers, and, it seems like we realize that these are the skills that you really need to be successful. And like you said, in any job, like no matter what you do, that's what you need. And it's very much what traditional schools don't give. It's so much
Yeah.
about that, like you were saying before, that little checkbox of like, I taught you that one little skill, or I taught you that one piece of content knowledge. And that's what that's what we needed to do. But what about all these bigger things about how I can interact with people and interact with
Mhm.
ideas and things like that?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
important.
Yeah. Um, all right. So I would love for you to talk to us a little bit about A Gentle Feast. So the
Yeah.
company that you started, tell us about that and what led you to start it.
Well, like I said, I really didn't know what I was doing with my own children. And so I was like, I have to figure this out. And so I just started like documenting and writing down what you're doing and trying to put it together. And I really thought about like, what did I need when I first started? And I didn't need to go just buy another book at a homeschool convention and take it home and be like, I don't know what I'm doing. Because I did
Mm-hmm.
that. And I was like, I needed someone who was like available and who could help me and who could walk me through it and could break it down in like these little pieces here. So I call it a gentle feast. Charlotte Mason said that, again, our minds need these constant diet of living ideas. And she said that education should be a feast. We're offering them a wide variety of subjects. We're not
Okay.
just like spending all of our day doing, these few skills. Like we're going to expose them to Shakespeare and beautiful art and music and things that we might not have experienced either. But we're going to give them this wide feast because we don't know what our child might take to or learn from.
Right.
And but all of these things are going to shape them as a person. And so I love that kind of feast metaphor. And again, as the role of the teacher, we're providing the feast, we're putting it together. So another misnomer, not misnomer, another myth about child miss education is that it's like just unschooling or child directed or whatever, which is totally not true. Is the parent is very much indicating what is to be learned and setting the table of the feast.
Okay.
But and I think this is where that kind of thought comes from is that the child's the one who's eating it though. I'm not forcing it down their throat, like I said with the mama bird, right? They're doing the
Mm-hmm.
hard work of self-education, of having to do the hard thinking, of having to put the ideas together and express them in a meaningful way. And so I think that's a little bit of where that comes from. And so the word gentle too, I think can be people like, well, does that mean it's not hard? And I was like, well, why do we think the opposite of gentle is hard? Like,
Mm-hmm.
because to me, gentle is something that is beautiful and lovely, and I want to experience it. It's not something that's forced upon me.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where I kind of came from because it is a very gentle way to learn of being able to have time to be outside, to be able to explore, to be able to do those kind of trial and error things like I was talking about, and to read these amazing books and listen to this beautiful music. It values children so much, and that's one of the reasons why I love it. But I'm also not forcing them to do, we might read a book and my child might narrate it and they might get something completely different than what I thought was important out of that reading.
Mm.
But I'm listening to them, I'm valuing them as a person. I'm like, oh, that's really interesting. I didn't even notice that guy had red hair. That's so cool. Like,
Mm-hmm.
And what a gift that is to allow children to feel seen and heard. And so to me, it's just such a gentle, natural flow of life. So that's kind of how I came up with that term.
Okay.
And really, my passion is just to really make it easy because we can really complicate it and
Mm,
add a whole bunch of stuff. And then the parents like, don't know what I'm doing. This is too hard. There's a lot of in the camp of Charlotte Mason, there are several that are like, well, this is how she did it, and this is the way you must do it. And we have to follow it, the exact way she was written. If you don't, then you're not doing it right, rather
mm,
than taking the philosophy and the approach and making it work for your family, which is more of what I advocate. Because it really does break my heart when I hear from parents of like, oh, I tried that. That was so hard. There's no way we could do that.
mm.
And they felt all this pressure that they had to do it perfectly and they had to do it this way or
The
they're doing
right
it wrong.
way. Mm-hmm.
Yes. And I'm like, that's not really, you know, I don't think even she would say that that was what she wanted, right? In the way that she was sending these programs to parents. And so I, I wanted to make it accessible, but I also wanted to make it realistic for today's modern world too. And it's not like we don't use any technology because Charlotte Mason even said the radio could be a wonderful tool for education. And she
Love that.
wasn't shying away from like new things that were being invented in
Yeah,
her time, right?
right.
And so it's like, okay, we're not just going to read books and pretend we're in the Victorian times and only read like
Yes.
I still want my kids to know how to use the Google Suite, and I want them to know about internet safety and I want them to know about taxes and things that like are relevant to today's time as well. So
Okay.
that's kind of what I tried to do with my curriculum.
Okay. So your mission was really, it sounds like to make things easy for people
Mhm.
because you had been there and you
Yeah.
had been to that place where you were so overwhelmed and you were like, I have no idea what I'm doing. And you can help all those people who are in the same exact spot because you've been there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
True.
Uh,
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what do you love most about your work? What are you most proud of?
Hmm. I don't like talking about myself. I have a really hard time, like even at like the homeschool conventions and stuff, like talking about my product was so hard. And I was like, I have to
Mm.
hire somebody to come work my booths because I can't talk about this.
You can just give
No,
us one little nugget, something
no, yes,
that you love.
I love hearing from families. A lot of the term that people use when they describe it over and over again is it's a breath of fresh air.
Hmm.
And I'm like, okay, if I helped one family breathe
Mm-hmm.
and enjoy their children and enjoy learning. And I gave one kid the gift of being able to be excited about. Sorry, I'm a sensitive
Hmm.
person.
Hmm.
I think back to me as a little kid and I wanted to be a teacher and I wanted to change the world and I couldn't, right? In the
Hmm.
system. And God led me to this amazing opportunity. I feel so like, why did you call me to this? Surely there was someone else like Moses. Surely there's someone else here that could do this much better than me. Um, but just hearing from these families about how their kids love learning again and how their kids
Hmm.
are enjoying XYZ and the difference that it's making in those lives. I mean, that's why I do what I do.
Yeah. Yeah, that's incredible. That is definitely something to feel proud of. To think that it's not like you just changing, one person's life, you're
No.
changing lots of people's lives by being able to, like you said, offer that breath of fresh air to people of like, we can love learning again and we can do this in a loving, fun way in our family.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. Thanks.
Um, well, are there any you touched on a couple of kind of myths, but are there any common either misconceptions or objections that you hear from parents about either homeschooling in general or the Charlotte Mason approach that you want to discuss?
Yeah, I think I touched on a few about, that it's child led is one I often get. Another one I often get is that it's only for young children because oftentimes like on Instagram and whatnot, you'll see people posting pictures of their kids using the Charlotte Mason approach and they're out in the
Okay.
woods and they're
Okay.
making these beautiful handicrafts and all these things. And I think the reason that is, and as someone who has teenagers, I could say this is true, like it's not as pretty to post a picture of like your 14-year-old hanging upside down reading a book and they haven't showered in 2 days, like so it's like And I want to respect their privacy too, because they
Okay,
care at that
yeah.
age. You know what I'm saying? And so it's
Yeah.
like there isn't as much to take pictures of at that age and post about. And so I think that can kind of lead to that misconception as well. But also like the stuff she wrote, back in her time, boys would be going to like a university type setting at 14, but
Hmm.
she did keep her programs going on up, mainly for girls that would still be at home
Okay.
receiving an education because they weren't allowed to go for further ed at that point. So she did her programs go all the way up. And if, like I said, if you look at them, they would put any college education to shame today.
Mm, yeah. Um, all right. Well, as we kind of wrap up here, is there any advice that you might give to parents who might be on this journey
Yeah.
themselves of either, maybe they have a really young child and they're just starting to kind of think, what are we going to do for education? Or maybe they're starting a homeschool journey and they're like, oh my gosh, there's so many options. What kind of
Yes.
advice might you give people in those stages at this point?
I think it's so key to think about, and I say this a lot. What is your why? Why do you want to homeschool? What is the end result you would like to see? Because that will determine the steps that you take to get to that result, right? So if it's like my child's going to get into an Ivy League college, that is the most important thing. That's why I'm homeschooling. Then your steps will look very different from someone who may not have that goal.
Hmm.
Or, if my why is, I want my children to love being with their siblings. I want them to be critical thinkers. I want them to explore their own interests. And, those are vastly different goals, right? And so that's really going to determine your steps. But then that's also going to determine kind of where you might land. So, yes, there's a lot of options out there. And it's good to, read, listen, explore some of the different philosophies. But I think that's really important because a lot of times I see parents who do what I did, and it's like, okay, we're just gonna buy these workbooks for all these different subjects because that's what a lot of homeschool publishers publish, and they look all shiny and pretty. But also, like, this is what feels normal. Like, this is school. This is what you do, right?
Hmm.
And so, being willing to kind of think outside the box, like you're already doing something revolutionary to begin with, right? By homeschooling your kids, and you're
Hmm.
pulling them out, you're already doing something revolutionary. So you could be even more revolutionary and try an approach is different. Like I'm pulling them out of something. Why would I copy that thing that I already felt like was broken? Right. But it's honestly because we don't know any different. And so from the get-go, if you're able to kind of think through that, that's going to be huge in terms of investing your time, investing your money, especially because a lot of this is not cheap. But Charlotte Mason, you get a library card and that's free. And
Yeah.
talk about the books and go outside in nature, and you're going to be doing really great. So it's,
Mm.
I feel like, much more affordable approach. You don't need a curriculum, even though I sell one. I will tell people that. But if sometimes it's good to know what books to use for what subjects, and if you don't want to spend your time finding all that out yourself, then a
Yeah.
curriculum might be helpful. But you really don't. Um, Need one to use this, which is an amazing gift as well. So I do actually have a free course. I can give you the link. It's called Beyond the Textbook and Exploring a Charlotte Mason Approach, but it's for beginners just to kind of walk through some of the basics and do a little where I put you in the shoes of a student and explore how this approach might be different. So
Awesome. Yeah.
parents
I
really
would love.
like that.
Yes, we would love to include that in the show notes for sure. And I love that advice that you gave about instead of just jumping into something and just starting to take these steps and not really understanding why, but
Yeah,
to really take that time to pause and like you said, think about what is my why? What is that long goal? And I can imagine it'd be really helpful for people to like write that down or like
yep,
have that
100%.
on the fridge or something where when you get into those deep moments or those kind of dark times of like, this is not
Yes.
going well, maybe I should try this thing to kind of have that as like your guiding star of like, wait a minute, that's not what we set out to do. And
Mhm.
like letting that kind of ground you a little bit of
Oh,
um
100%. Because it's so easy to
yeah.
be blown by the homeschool winds. There's so much new stuff and new things, and my friend's doing this. And, it's like, oh. And then it's like you're always reinventing the wheel, and that's not good for you
Hmm.
or your kids. One, that's going to burn you out really fast because that's
Yep.
really stressful to always be learning something and trying something new. But then your kids are like, whoa, they get
What
whiplash.
is?
Like last week we were doing something completely different. What is going on? Not that you have to figure it out all from day one. You can change that kind of mission and
Right.
change that North Star. But at least having that kind of guiding principle, one, it helps with kind of like your long-term focus. But I also tell parents like that determines like your weekly, daily plan as well,
Hmm.
because are you planning time in your week for the things that are most important to you? So if one of the things that's most important to your family is that you give your kids the gift of nature and being outdoors, and you don't put a weekly hike or weekly time on your calendar, and then you're like, oh, it never happens, I feel so discouraged, it's because the thing that really matters to you most is never happening because it was never a priority.
Yeah. Right. It's getting
And
buried
so,
by all the things you thought you should be doing and adding to the calendar or whatever.
or someone else told you yes, right?
Yeah.
This is what the expert said I was supposed to be doing instead. So we didn't do the nature walk. Well, no,
Hmm.
if that's something you really value, that needs to go in there first.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Julie,
Yeah,
for
you're so
being
welcome. Thanks for
here
having
and
me.
taking time to talk to me today. And for listeners, if you'd like to learn more about Julie and her work at the Gentle Feast, we'll include all those links for you in the show notes
Yes.
as well as the free course that you
Yeah.
mentioned. So, and don't forget to subscribe to the Education Breakdown and follow us on Instagram so that you can continue to learn more about different educational opportunities that are out there for your family and your children. So, thanks for everyone for being here.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks, Julie.
Hey, 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 thanks for watching. If you liked this episode, please heart it down below and make sure you subscribe so you never miss an episode. Leave a comment and let me know what you learned in today's episode. I'd love to hear from you.